I found out my sister had been lying to me for 11 months from a stranger's text message sent to the wrong number. My grandmother passed on a Tuesday in early March, quiet in her sleep, the way she always said she wanted to go. Her name was Dorothy Voss. To everyone who loved her, and she was 84 years old and the sharpest person I have ever known. She kept a ledger by hand until the year she died. Column by column, everything accounted for. She used to say that a woman who doesn't know her own numbers doesn't know her own life. I got that from her. I got a lot of things from her. What I didn't know, standing at her graveside in the March wind, while my sister Renata cried next to me with perfect mascara, was that Renata had already made a phone call. Not to the funeral home, not to the attorney, to a jewelry buyer in the next town over, a man named Philip Court who ran an estate sale business out of a converted Victorian on Maple Street. She'd made that call 3 days before Grandma died. While Grandma was still breathing, still in her own bed, still wearing the ring my grandfather had placed on her finger in 1963. She didn't know I had the receipts, every single one, 62 years of them, sorted by year and item in a fireproof box Grandma had pressed into my hands at Christmas, 8 weeks before she passed. She'd looked me in the eye when she gave it to me and said, "Watch the paper, Clara. The paper always tells the truth." I thought she meant her finances. I thought she was asking me to help settle her estate carefully. She meant something else entirely. And it took me 11 months and a misdirected text message to understand what she'd known all along. Welcome to silent drama stories, where the truth doesn't shout. It waits. If you've ever been the person in your family who quietly held everything together while someone else quietly helped themselves, this one is for you. Drop a comment and tell me who in your life has earned your trust completely. And subscribe, because what Grandma put in that fireproof box is the kind of thing you need to sit down for. Let me tell you who I was before that March, because it matters for everything that comes after. I'm a paralegal, have been for 12 years, working for a small estate and probate firm in Columbus, Ohio, which means I spend my professional life reading the fine print that other people skip. Wills, trusts, inventory lists, asset schedules. I know how estates work the way a mechanic knows an engine. I know where things go wrong. I know where people cut corners, and I know better than most what those corners eventually cost. I live alone in a house I bought at 32, a narrow craftsman with a good porch and a lemon tree that never produces lemons but tries its best every spring. I have 2 cats named after Supreme Court justices. I run on Sundays. My social life is small and deliberate. My finances are organized to a degree that my friends find slightly alarming and I find deeply comforting. My sister Renata is 33. She lives 40 minutes away in a newer development with her husband, Troy, and their 2 kids. Renata is the kind of beautiful that makes strangers helpful. She has always known how to be in a room. Growing up, she was the one who got the solos in the choir, the lead in the school play, the full attention of every adult she walked past. I was 4 years older and already a little too serious and a little too quiet. The kind of child who preferred the library to the birthday party, who read the instruction manual before assembling anything. My mother used to say Renata lit up a room. She used to say I furnished it. I understood that wasn't a compliment. I accepted it anyway because that's what the quiet, capable one does. You accept the lesser role and you make yourself useful and you tell yourself that being needed is its own kind of belonging. Grandma never saw it that way. Grandma saw me. She was my father's mother, which meant she existed slightly outside the particular gravity of my immediate family. My parents divorced when I was 14 and Renata was 10, and in the years after, things aligned in the way they often do after a family splits. I gravitated toward my father's side, quieter and more practical. Renata stayed close to our mother, warmer and more social. There was no formal choosing. It just settled that way, the way water finds its level. But Grandma made sure I knew I was hers. She called me every Sunday evening for 20 years, not to ask for anything, not to check in with a list of concerns, just to talk the way people used to talk before talking became a transaction. She told me about her week and asked about mine. She remembered the names of my colleagues. She asked follow-up questions. She was interested in my actual life in a way that my mother, my sister, and most of the people I knew had never quite managed to sustain. When Grandpa Harold died 6 years ago, it was me she called first. When she got the diagnosis 2 years later, the slow one, the kind that moves like weather, it was me she told first. And when she decided she didn't want to go to a facility, that she wanted to stay in her house on Clement Street until the end, it was me she asked. So I drove the 40 minutes every Thursday. I handled her bills and her prescriptions and her appointments. I organized her paperwork, updated her will, and sat with her on Sunday afternoons watching old movies she'd seen 40 times and still enjoyed. Renata came for holidays. She brought flowers and the children and her easy warmth, and Grandma Dot was always glad to see her. But the Thursday visits were mine, and I didn't resent it. I want to be clear about that because it matters for how I felt later. I didn't do it out of obligation. I did it because those Thursday afternoons on Clement Street were some of the best hours of my week. I loved her, completely and without condition. I think that's why what Renata did felt like it had two edges. The betrayal of Grandma Dot and the betrayal of me. The fireproof box came at Christmas. I want to describe it to you carefully because I've thought about this moment 100 times since, and I understand now that Grandma Dot was not being casual. She was precise about everything. She had been a bookkeeper for 30 years. She did nothing carelessly. We were in her living room after dinner. The grandchildren had been put to bed upstairs. Renata and Troy were in the kitchen doing the dishes, and my father was asleep in the armchair the way fathers do at Christmas. Grandma Dot reached under the end table beside her chair, the one with the lamp and the crossword puzzle book, and she pulled out the box. It was gray metal, about the size of a shoebox, with a combination lock. She turned it to me and told me the combination out loud, once, clearly, while looking at my face to make sure I was memorizing it. Inside the box there were folders, labeled, tabbed in her handwriting, one folder for each category of her estate, her financial accounts, the house, the car, her insurance policy, her funeral preferences already arranged and paid for with the receipt attached, and one folder thicker than the others labeled simply Dorothy's Jewelry. I opened it and there were pages and pages of documentation. Receipts going back to the 1960s, each piece recorded by hand, then later on a typewriter, then eventually printed from a computer that she'd taught herself to use at 72. Description of the item, date purchased or received, from whom, the occasion, the price paid when applicable, and in a second column the estimated current value, updated over the years in different pens, different inks. 62 years of jewelry. Some pieces I recognized. The garnet earrings she wore to church. The pearl strand Harold had given her for their 25th anniversary. The sapphire brooch she'd inherited from her own mother. Some pieces I'd never seen, kept wrapped in velvet inside the mahogany jewelry box on her dresser. I want you to have all of this, she said. Not to sell, to keep. These pieces have a history, you'll know what to do with them. Then she said the thing I thought I understood and didn't. Not yet. Watch the paper, Clara. The paper always tells the truth. I asked if she wanted me to keep the box at my house for safekeeping. She shook her head. She wanted it to stay with her where she could see it. She just wanted me to know the combination. She wanted me to know what was in it. 8 weeks later, she was gone. And when I drove to Clement Street the following Thursday out of pure reflex, the habit of 100 Thursday mornings, and let myself in with my key and stood in the kitchen that smelled like her, I was so deep in grief that it didn't occur to me to open the box until 3 days after that. When I did, the jewelry folder was empty. I want to be precise about my reaction because it wasn't what you might expect. I didn't panic. I didn't call Renata immediately. I didn't cry. I sat at Grandma Dot's kitchen table with the empty folder in my hands, and I felt something settle in my chest, cold and careful, the way it does at work when I open a document and find that something has been removed that should be there. Professional habit is a hard thing to override. What I felt was not rage. What I felt was, something is wrong here and I need to understand exactly what before I say a single word to anyone. I went through the box systematically. Everything else was there. The financial folders, the insurance documents, the house records, all of it intact. Just the jewelry pages gone, not the folder itself. Just the contents, the 62 years of documentation that listed every piece, every receipt, every value. Except she had made me memorize the combination. She had shown me what was inside, and I had spent 12 years reading legal documents in a firm that handles estates. I had 12 years of understanding exactly what the absence of documentation means and exactly what it's designed to accomplish. I closed the box, and I went upstairs to the bedroom. The mahogany jewelry box on the dresser was empty. Not moved, not relocated, empty. The velvet compartment sat open and bare under the afternoon light. I stood there for a long time. I thought about the last Thursday I had been there, 9 days before Grandma Dot passed, when she had been sleeping more than waking and her hands had been very still on the coverlet. I had sat beside her and read out loud for 2 hours from the novel on her nightstand. The jewelry box had been on the dresser. I was almost certain of it. I was certain enough of it that the certainty felt like something I needed to write down. I went back to the kitchen and I sat down and I opened a document on my laptop and I began to type everything I could remember, while I still remembered it precisely, the way I would for any case at work. Then I drove home. I did not call Renata. The estate moved through probate the way estates do, slowly and with paperwork. Grandma Dot's will was clear. The house and her financial accounts were to be split equally between my father and his brother, my Uncle Pat, who lived in Phoenix and called twice a year. Her personal property, her furniture, her clothing, her household items, was to be divided between her 2 grandchildren, Renata and me, with the jewelry specified to go to me. The will said it plainly. My jewelry collection, documented in the inventory maintained in my personal records, is to pass in full to my granddaughter Clara Ann Voss. She had updated the will 11 months before she died. I had helped her update it, sitting at this same kitchen table, reading through the document with her while she made corrections in her precise handwriting. I knew what it said. I knew about the jewelry clause. Whoever had taken the jewelry either hadn't known about that clause or had decided it didn't apply to them. I had a guess about which one. I want to tell you something about the weeks that followed the funeral because I think it explains how I managed to stay quiet for as long as I did. Grief does something strange to time. It compresses some things and stretches others. I was very functional on the surface, handling the estate paperwork, fielding calls from the attorney, coordinating with my uncle. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. On Thursday mornings, I still had the reflex to get in the car. I still reached for my phone to call her. I kept the box she'd given me at my house now, and sometimes I'd sit with the empty jewelry folder in my hands, and I'd think about her voice saying, "Watch the paper, Clara." I think she knew. I think she knew before she died that the jewelry was at risk. I think she knew who would take it, and she tried, in the careful way she did everything, to make sure I would be able to prove it. But I didn't yet know the full shape of what had happened. I had an empty box and an absent folder and a very strong professional instinct. What I needed was documentation I didn't already have. So I worked, quietly, methodically in the evenings and on weekends, the way I work on anything that matters. I started with what I remembered from that folder. I'm a paralegal. I read and retained details for a living. I remembered most of the key pieces. The pearl strand, the sapphire brooch, the garnet earrings, a diamond tennis bracelet Harold had given her for their 40th anniversary, a gold locket with a photograph inside, a set of coral pieces she'd bought in Italy in 1978, 8 primary pieces of significant value, and perhaps a dozen smaller items. Then I did what a person does in the digital age when they need to find out if something has been sold. I looked. Estate sale listings, online auction platforms, antique dealers, jewelry resale sites. I wasn't sure what I'd find or when. I just started looking. On a Thursday evening in late April, 7 weeks after the funeral, I found the pearl strand. It was listed on an online consignment platform specializing in estate jewelry, described as a graduated freshwater pearl necklace, vintage, with an 18K gold clasp in excellent condition. The seller was listed as a business, Court Estate Sales, Dayton, Ohio. I looked at the pearl strand in the photograph for a long time. I looked at the gold clasp, which had a small decorative detail, a tiny floret, that that I had seen up close 100 times when I'd helped Grandma fasten it. The floret was there in the photograph. My hands were very steady when I saved the listing. Professional habit. You document first and react later. The name Court Estate Sales meant nothing to me for about 4 minutes. Then I searched it and found the address. A converted Victorian on Maple Street in Dayton. I looked at the photographs on the business website. Philip Court, proprietor, with a photo of himself in the shop surrounded by display cases of jewelry and silverware. Then I searched for something I should have thought of sooner. I searched Renata's name alongside Court Estate Sales. Nothing came up. Of course not. People who are hiding things aren't careless enough to leave a public connection. But what I did find was a review, dated 8 weeks before Grandma died. A 5-star review on the business's Google listing, written under the username R. Hartwell, which is Renata's married name initial and Troy's last name. The review read, Philip was professional and discreet, fair prices and fast process. Highly recommend for estate pieces. Discreet. That word sat in the middle of the review like a stone. 8 weeks before Grandma died. She had already made contact 8 weeks before Grandma died. I saved the review. I took a screenshot, dated, time-stamped. I noted the username. Then I sat in my kitchen for a while with my hands flat on the table, not moving. I thought about the last Christmas. I thought about Renata in the kitchen doing dishes while Grandma pressed the box into my hands. I thought about what discreet means to a person who is selling something that doesn't belong to them. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it DV Estate Documentation. I saved everything. I did not call Renata. What I did instead was go to Philip Court's shop on a Saturday morning in early May. I wore my work clothes, which is to say I looked like someone who handles paperwork for a living, which is exactly what I am. I brought a folder with 3 documents in it. The will, open to the jewelry clause. A photograph of Grandma wearing the pearl strand, taken at her 80th birthday party, with the date visible on the frame. And a printed copy of the listing I'd found online. Philip Court was a heavy-set man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful manner of someone who has navigated uncomfortable conversations before. His shop was what you'd expect. Glass cases, soft lighting, items arranged tastefully. It smelled like furniture polish and old money. I introduced myself. I told him I was handling an estate matter. I told him I believed some items that were recently consigned to his shop had been taken from the estate without authorization. I showed him the 3 documents in the folder, calmly and in order. He looked at the photograph of Grandma. He looked at the listing. He looked at the will. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, carefully, that the items had been brought to him by a woman who represented herself as the granddaughter of the deceased and the authorized seller of the personal property. I said, I am the granddaughter of the deceased and the authorized heir of the jewelry. I put the will on the counter and pointed to the clause. There are 2 granddaughters. The jewelry was specified to one of us. It was not specified to her. He looked at the will. He read the clause. His expression went through several things in a short amount of time. I asked him how many pieces he currently had in inventory. He went to his records. He came back with a list. He had 4 pieces: the pearl strand, the sapphire brooch, one of the coral pieces, and the gold locket. The diamond tennis bracelet, the garnet earrings, the remaining coral pieces, and several smaller items had already been sold. I asked for his records of the transaction. He was reluctant for about 2 minutes, and then his reluctance ran into the legal reality that I understood very clearly, and he understood moderately clearly, which is that receiving stolen property, even unknowingly, creates a specific kind of exposure. I wasn't threatening him. I was informing him. There's a difference, and experienced people recognize it. He pulled the transaction record. The seller's name was on it, Renata Hartwell. The date was 5 days after Grandma's funeral. 5 days. He'd paid her $4,200 for everything she'd brought him. The pieces he still had were listed at a combined retail of approximately $11,000. The pieces already sold had gone for, according to his records, another $3,800. Total received, $8,000. Total value of what she'd taken, based on the documentation in the folder Grandma had kept, was closer to $31,000. I thanked Philip Court for his cooperation. I told him I would be in contact through the estate's attorney and that I would need his full transaction record in writing. He gave it to me, printed and signed, before I left. He seemed relieved to have someone to hand the problem to. I drove home. I put Philip Court's records in my DV estate folder. I added them to the will. I added them to the review screenshot. I added them to my own typed notes from the day I'd found the empty box. I still did not call Renata. There's a particular discipline in staying quiet when you know something. I want to explain it because people sometimes read that silence as passivity. It isn't. Staying quiet when you know something is one of the hardest and most deliberate things you can do. Every professional instinct I have tells me that information released too early, before it's complete, loses its effect. A document with a gap in it is weaker than a complete document. An accusation without full evidence invites denial and counter-narrative. My sister is, among other things, a very convincing person. I had seen her talk her way out of things her entire life. I had watched adults believe her version of events over the physical evidence in front of them. I needed the file to be complete before I opened it. I needed every receipt, as Grandma had said. Through May and June, I continued working the documentation. I identified 2 more pieces through online listings. One had already sold. One, the garnet earrings, was still available through a different platform. Court had apparently moved them quickly to a second seller. I bought them back myself, $80. I don't regret it. I obtained a formal statement from Philip Court through the estate attorney, who I had quietly looped in by mid-May. Her name is Frances, and she's been doing probate work for 30 years, which means that nothing surprises her, and she moves with the contained efficiency of a person who has seen every way families can go wrong. When I laid out the documentation for her, she looked through it without changing expression and said, "This is a theft from an estate. That's a felony in Ohio." I asked her how I should proceed. She said, "That depends on what you want. If you want prosecution, we report it. If you want recovery, we have more options. If you want both, we start by making sure the file is airtight." I said, I want her to look at the file and understand that there is no version of this where she talks her way out. Frances looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Then let's make sure the file is airtight." The text message came in July. I was at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon and my phone buzzed. Unknown number, 937 area code, which is Dayton. The message said, "Hey Philip, can you check if you still have the diamond bracelet from the Voss lot? My client is asking about it again. Renata says she might have more pieces from the same estate coming. Let me know what you're getting." I looked at that text for a long time. The message was meant for Philip Court. My number and his apparently differ by 1 digit. Someone had transposed them. It happens. More pieces from the same estate coming. 11 months after Grandma died. I'd thought the theft was complete. I'd thought she'd taken what she could take quickly, before anyone noticed, and closed the account. But the message said more pieces coming, which meant Renata either had pieces she hadn't yet sold or she was planning to go back to Clement Street. The house was still in probate. My father and Uncle Pat had not yet agreed on what to do with it, which meant it was technically still a shared asset, still accessible. Renata had a key. She'd had a key for years, from the time she used to take the kids over for visits. I called Frances that afternoon. I said, "The situation has developed." I sent her the screenshot of the text message. She read it and called me back within the hour. She said, "I think we need to move this to the next stage sooner than we planned." I agreed. But before the legal process moved forward, before Frances sent the formal notice to Renata and Troy's attorney, something else happened. Something I hadn't planned for, which is to say something human in a situation I had been handling entirely as a professional problem. My father called. He'd been relatively quiet through the estate process, letting me handle most of it because I was the one who knew how. He called me on a Thursday evening, which felt right, Thursday, and his voice was the voice of a man who has been carrying something and has decided it's too heavy. He said, "Clara, I need to tell you something. Renata called me last week. She told me she'd cleared out some of the jewelry from Mom's house because she thought Mom would have wanted her to have some of it. She said you probably hadn't noticed." I let that sit for a moment. She'd told him. She'd gotten ahead of it, at least with our father. She was building a counter-narrative. I said, "Dad, I need to send you some documents." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is it bad?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Grandma Dot handing me the box, the combinations spoken out loud, the careful instruction to watch the paper. I thought about the empty folder and the empty jewelry box and the mahogany case with the open velvet compartments. I said, "Grandma Dot knew it was coming, Dad. She prepared for it. She made sure I'd be able to prove it." He didn't say anything for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was very flat. "Send me the documents." I did, all of them. The will with the jewelry clause, Philip Court's transaction record, the sale listings with photographs, the dated Google review with the username, the text from the wrong number, Francis's formal assessment. He called me back 2 hours later, and he sounded like a man who had aged several years in one evening. He said, "Your grandmother knew. She always knew things before anyone else did." I said yes. He said, "What do you need from me?" That was the moment I understood that my father, who is not a man who involves himself in conflict if he can avoid it, was standing up. Quietly in his way, but standing. I told him I needed him to not warn Renata, to let the process move forward, to trust that I had it handled. He said, "I trust you," and the way he said it sounded like Grandma Dot. Francis sent the formal notice on a Thursday in August, because of course it was a Thursday. The notice was addressed to Renata and Troy and their attorney, who they had to scramble to find in the week between when Renata saw it coming and when it arrived. It documented the theft from the estate. It listed every identified piece. It cited the will clause. It attached Philip Court's transaction record, the sale listings, the Google review, the text message, and my sworn statement as the will-designated heir to the jewelry collection and the witness to its presence in the house before the death. It requested full restitution, the return of the 4 pieces still in Philip Court's possession, and the cash value of every piece already sold, calculated against the documentation in the estate records. And it gave 30 days to respond before Francis filed with the probate court and referred the matter to the county prosecutor. Renata called me 40 minutes after the notice landed. I know the timing because I was watching my phone. I let it ring. She called again. I let it ring. Then she texted. The text said, "Clara, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. Please call me." A misunderstanding. The third time I had heard that word used to describe something that was not a misunderstanding. I had the transaction record with her signature on it. I had the listing photographs. I had the text message. I had the will. I had 11 months of documentation in a folder that Francis had described as one of the tidier theft cases she'd seen in 3 decades of probate work. I did not call back. I texted one sentence. "My attorney is handling communications regarding the estate. Please contact Francis Whitmore's office directly." Then I put the phone down, and I made dinner, and I fed my cats, and I sat on the good porch of my Craftsman house, and I watched the evening happen. The formal response came through attorneys. Renata's position, as communicated through her lawyer, was that she had understood the jewelry to be shared property of the estate, that Grandma Dot had verbally indicated she wanted Renata to have some of the pieces, and that she had acted in good faith. There were 3 problems with that position. The first was the will, signed 11 months before the death, specifying the jewelry to me by name. The second was the timeline. The Google review established contact with the buyer before the death, which is not consistent with someone who believes they have a legitimate claim and is handling things in good faith after the fact. The third was the text message, which referenced more pieces from the same estate coming 11 months post-death, which is inconsistent with the narrative of an innocent misunderstanding that was completed in the days after the funeral. Francis sent a 2-page response to Renata's attorney that laid out these 3 problems with the clinical precision of someone who has been doing this for 30 years. I read it twice and thought that it was beautiful, the way a spreadsheet that finally balances is beautiful. Renata's attorney advised her to settle. The settlement took 6 weeks to finalize. The 4 pieces in Philip Court's possession were returned to me through the estate. They arrived via courier in a small padded box, and I sat at my kitchen table and opened it and took out the pearl strand and the sapphire brooch and the gold locket and the single piece of coral, and I held the pearl strand in my hands for a long time. I thought about Grandma Dot's neck and the gold clasp with the tiny floret and the 100 times I had sat across from her while she wore it. The cash restitution for the sold pieces was paid in 2 installments. Total recovery, less attorney's fees, was approximately $19,000, not the full value. Some of the sold pieces had gone to buyers Francis couldn't trace quickly, but it was most of it. The record was corrected. The account was settled. My father came over the weekend the pieces arrived. He sat at my kitchen table, and I laid everything out for him, the pieces that were recovered, the documentation that had made it possible, and the folder with Grandma Dot's handwriting on the tab. He picked up the folder and looked at her handwriting for a long time. Then he set it down and he said, "She gave you the combination at Christmas." I said yes. He said, "She knew exactly what she was doing." I said, "She always did." He didn't say anything else for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. What Renata was doing, I should have paid more attention." I told him that Renata had been practicing that particular skill her whole life, and that some people are just very good at being believed, and that it wasn't his fault for trusting his daughter. He was quiet about that. He is a quiet man, my father, in the way that Grandma Dot was quiet, deliberate, still. We had dinner. He held the pearl strand once more before he left, carefully, by the ends, the way you hold something that belongs to someone who is gone. There is a conversation I have not yet told you about, the one with Renata. We spoke once directly during those 6 weeks of settlement. Once, on the phone, for 11 minutes. Her attorney hadn't wanted her to make contact, but she called from Troy's phone on a Saturday morning, and I answered because I didn't recognize the number and I was done not answering things. She cried, of course she cried. She is very good at crying. But this was different from the mascara tears at the graveside. This was messier, less controlled. The crying of someone who has been caught, which has a different texture than the crying of someone who is grieving. She said she hadn't thought I'd notice for a long time. She said the pieces would have just sat in a box, and she could have used the money. She said she'd always thought Grandma Dot liked us both equally, and it wasn't fair that the jewelry all went to me. She said she was sorry. I let her say everything. I didn't interrupt. When she was done, I said, "Renata, you contacted that buyer before she died. She was still alive. I need you to understand that I know that." Silence. The folder she kept, the receipts, the records, she gave me the combination to that box at Christmas. She showed me everything that was in it. I think she knew what you were planning to do. More silence. She spent 62 years documenting those pieces, every receipt, every occasion, every value. She did that carefully and deliberately her entire adult life. And then she made sure I would be able to prove what happened to them. I heard Renata start to cry again, differently this time. "She didn't do it to punish you," I said. "She did it because she trusted me to watch the paper. That's what she asked me to do, and I did it." I don't know what Renata understood from that. I don't know if she understood anything. Some truths take a long time to land, and some people have spent a lifetime insulating themselves from the kind of accountability that documentation creates. What I know is that I said what was true, and I said it calmly and without raising my voice, and then I told her that I hoped she and Troy and the kids were okay, and I ended the call. I have not spoken to her since. I don't know what that means for the long term. I know what it means for right now, which is that I am not going to pretend something didn't happen because pretending is more comfortable. The reckoning happened. The paper told the truth. What comes after is a different story, one that hasn't been written yet, and I'm content to let it sit unwritten for a while. Here is what I do with the jewelry now. The pieces that came back, I keep in the mahogany box. I brought it home from Clement Street in the days after we settled the estate, drove it in my back seat the way you carry something fragile, and set it on my dresser. It is the first thing I see in the morning. I wear the garnet earrings sometimes, the ones I bought back for $80 from the second platform, because they are small and dark and they feel like her. I wore the pearl strand to a work event in September and Frances saw them and asked about them, and I told her the whole story, standing in a hotel lobby, and she shook her head slowly at the end and said, "Your grandmother was a smart woman." She was the smartest person I knew, and she knew it wasn't enough to plan her estate carefully. She knew that the careful plan needed a witness. She knew that she needed someone who read the fine print, who kept records, who understood that documentation is not paranoia, it is protection. She chose the granddaughter who furnished the room instead of the one who lit it up, and she gave her a combination and a box full of receipts and the instruction to watch the paper. The locket is the piece I keep closest. Gold oval, with a tiny clasp that requires a fingernail to open. Inside is a photograph of my grandfather Harold on one side, and on the other side, much smaller, a photograph of me that I don't remember being taken. I might have been 9 or 10. I'm looking at something outside the frame and I'm smiling, the private smile of someone who doesn't know they're being watched. She put me in the locket. I didn't know until I opened it, weeks after everything was resolved, sitting at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening in October. I sat with it open in my palm for a long time. Here is what I've learned. Not the legal lesson, which is real and worth knowing, that the person whose name is on the will is the person who has standing, and that documentation is the only argument that cannot be interrupted. The other thing. My grandmother spent her whole life being precise, keeping records, accounting for things carefully, and for a long time I think the people around her saw that as her being cautious or particular or maybe a little difficult, too focused on the details, too attached to the paper trail. What I understand now is that the paper trail was her form of love. Every receipt in that folder was a record of something that mattered. The sapphire brooch from her mother, the pearls from Harold, the coral from Italy in 1978, the trip she took with 3 friends when she was 44, after her youngest started school and she had 2 weeks to herself for the first time in a decade. She kept the receipt from the Italian shop, faded now, the ink barely legible, but there. Every piece documented not because she was suspicious, but because she understood that the things that matter deserve to be witnessed. She witnessed all of it, and then she made sure I would too. The people who praise you for being the reliable one, the one who reads the fine print and keeps the records and shows up with a folder, they're sometimes just nomming the person they've decided they'll never have to be. And the day you stop being useful on their terms is the day you discover whether there was something real underneath the arrangement. There was something real between me and Grandma Dot. It had nothing to do with utility. It was a particular frequency that some people share, a way of paying attention to the world, of believing that precision is a form of care. She recognized it in me before I recognized it in myself. And at the end, when she understood what was coming, she trusted me with everything she'd spent a lifetime building carefully and said, "Watch the paper." I watched it. The paper told the truth, the way she always said it would. That's the story. A fireproof box, 62 years of receipts, and the grandmother who made sure that what mattered to her would end up exactly where she intended. If this one landed close to something in your life, drop a comment and tell me about someone who saw you the way Dorothy Voss saw me. And if you've been the person who kept the records while everyone else kept moving, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.